Hi there, I'm Tom Field. I'm Senior Vice President of Editorial with Information Security Media Group. I want to welcome you back and specifically to this session. It's called Continuous Cloud Security and Compliance for Financial Services. A little bit of background. Data breaches caused by cloud misconfigurations continue to be rampant, costing enterprises an estimated $5 trillion in 2018 and 2019 alone. In this session, Christopher Hertz of Rapid7, Thomas Martin of NephōSec. We're going to discuss how to identify and implement systems that are cloud native and can help you address the unique challenges of public cloud offerings through automation. With that, let me turn this over to Christopher Hertz and Thomas Martin. Gentlemen, the stage is yours.
Thank you, and pleasure to be here. Let me also share my screen here so we can talk about some of this stuff, and I'll take the opportunity to quickly introduce myself again. As Tom mentioned, I'm Christopher Hertz, Vice President of Cloud Security for Rapid7, and in that role, really lead the sales, customer success, product support teams to support the DivvyCloud by Rapid7 product. And with me is my longtime, colleague and partner in crime who's worked with us for many years, Thomas Martin, who's, I'll give Thomas a chance to sort of introduce himself, but is the CEO of NephoSec.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks, Tom. Great to be here. Yeah, so Chris, as you mentioned, it's been great. We've been partnered with DivvyCloud by Rapid7 for a number of years. We're now a gold reseller partner, and we spend our time working with individual clients, both deploying the Rapid7 product line and working to secure their cloud environments. Formerly with General Electric, where we had an opportunity to move over 9,000 workloads to public cloud, and in the process, spent a lot of time with DivvyCloud securing those. So great to be here today.
Thanks, Thomas. I appreciate it. And thanks, Tom. I think we'll roll right in here and I think start with a little bit of a view of the world as I see it, Thomas, and as Rapid7 sees it, and love your thought. We often work with customers who are frankly struggling as they, especially in the current world of the pandemic, which has created a lot of unplanned digital and workforce disruption. Yeah. We see folks who are having to, trying to accelerate technology innovation to sort of reduce the time that it takes to do that. And they have a managed security risk that they've always been part of. But because of all this disruption, because of the quicker movement to cloud, you see this risk created by the pace of innovation and disruption that often is not actually secured effectively. And this creates a security achievement gap that companies are often really challenged by. And that's we think of that as three-dimensional risk, because again, you have this risk again of just the fast change in technology, the adoption of technology, the changes even within cloud services, the changes of who's using cloud services, the shortened horizon in which to be able to do that. And then again, this other level of just digital and workforce disruption that has now been ongoing for months and months and will probably continue on for some time. Thomas, have you seen this as you've worked with a number of the folks that you work over at NephoSec?
Absolutely, and Chris, I'd actually say that was the prior curve to the pandemic. I'd say now it's like a hockey stick, right? I mean, it's just the amount of disruption that has been caused and continues to be as folks rapidly run to these technologies. And I think, as folks work to try to get everyone with this ability not only to work from home, but to transact in a world where folks were staying at home, has caused this massive adoption and rapid change. Yeah. And it's a lot to consume, and it's a lot to take in. And I know what we'll highlight, later on, but a lot of it comes down to two is how do you bring the entire organization through this at the same speed while being able to remain secure?
Well, I think the key here is that a lot of this is being driven by cloud security and the adoption of cloud. And I will say that when we talk about cloud in the context of this conversation, we're really thinking about Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, Alibaba Cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, OCI. Those are the things we're thinking about. We're not, so the infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, functions as a service, containers as a service, right? That portfolio. We're not really talking as much about SaaS in this conversation, which is certainly cloud as well. But our focus today is really going to be on what we think of as the hyperscale public cloud providers of infrastructure, et cetera. And with that, I will call it a few highlights here. First of all, one of the things that people always ask me, and I'm sure you've heard this, is cloud secure? And my answer is yes. Public cloud is incredibly secure. I don't know of any breach of AWS, Azure, GCP ever. Like the major cloud service providers. When you hear about breaches that involve the cloud, it is because the organization has not operated the cloud appropriately. So while the cloud itself, the underlying services were secure, the operation of those services was what was insecure. And so, a few things that have come out, Gartner talked about this in October 2019. So it's a little dated, but I'll tell you, it still holds true, which is, 90% of organizations that fail to control public cloud use will inappropriately share sensitive data. Through 2024, the majority of enterprises will continue to struggle with appropriate, the appropriateness of how to manage security risk. And through 2025, 99% of cloud security failures will be the customer's fault. And I would say, when you talk about the major public cloud providers like AWS, Azure, GCP, that's really 100%.
Yeah.
It is always the customer's fault. And I'll turn it over here, Thomas, to you. As you think about cyber attacks, maybe talk us through a little bit about what you see, from your experience in the field, while folks sort of look at the fact that, cyber attacks are on the rise. They cause real damage. And by the way, financial services industry has, a much higher likelihood of being an attack, occurring against them for all the obvious reasons, right? But what have you seen in the market, Thomas, relative to this sort of world of misconfigurations and data breaches?
Well, I think for one, spot on the prior slide, right? I mean, it comes down to that shared responsibility model. And I think, as folks at OptiCloud, it's one of the key things that needs to not only be understood and certainly communicated across the entire organization, that ultimately we're responsible to take these amazing pieces of technology and configure them in a way that run our workloads that provide the access that's needed, but at the same time ensures that everything remains secure. And I think, the big thing is data ultimately is the new oil. And, when you look at what hackers are trying to get at, they're trying to get at the oil that's worth the most amount of money, and that's going to most likely be in the financial services sector. So it's certainly an area that everyone needs to hone in on. I think, you see it in the news today, and we always have, and I think we will, and that's really, there's so many things that we do need to secure, but ultimately just even starting at data storage and buckets is a critical factor of ensuring that those aren't open to public.
Yeah. Well, let's talk.
We continue to see it every day with our clients where we're working, and it's getting that visibility and knowing that you have a problem to address.
Well, let's talk about that, which is often, and I think this is changing, right? 4 or 5 years ago, cloud security would often be considered an afterthought, right? And sometimes you still see that. But I think increasingly people want to get ahead of cloud security.
Yeah.
They just don't necessarily know how. And I'd love to talk about, you and I have talked about this in the past. There's sort of 3 core pillars that you've talked about from your experience at General Electric and your experience with NephoSec guiding a lot of other large organizations through this. But there's culture, there's frameworks, and there's systems that all need to tie together in order to bring cloud security into the forefront. Can we maybe just spend a few minutes and just touch each one of these? With culture, let me set it up and then I'll hand it to you.
Sure.
What you've always told me is, look, go back in the data center world where everything was managed centrally by IT. You had to have a command and control mentality. You shift now to the cloud world where it's all about democratization of access to IT, that you have now dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of developers and analysts and engineers who now have self-service access to cloud. Your culture of your organization from your security perspective needs to move away from command and control. And can you talk a little about what that looks like from a cultural perspective?
Sure.
Yeah.
And so I think, to kind of kick it off, right? For the first piece is I'd say is, and this is, a great way to lay it out, because in the past we would have always probably called it people, processes, and tools, right?
Sure.
And now you can really think about it as culture, frameworks, and systems. And even then, we always said people were the hardest part of the equation to shift and change. And I'd say in many cases, culture stands that way today, but the process piece has gone backwards a little bit into that cultural piece. And what I mean by that is, to your point prior with the command and control, you also had a different set of scopes of responsibility or separation of duties, right? When an application team wanted those resources to run their applications on, it would be a request. It was configured and handed over with a set of keys and usernames and passwords to go ahead and manage. Today, obviously, with infrastructure as code and pipelines, now a lot of that is shifted over, and it really requires that cultural shift. Some folks will say, everyone's responsible for security. Well, some folks will say, well, then if everyone's responsible, then no one's responsible. And I disagree with that and say that everyone needs to be culturally aware, but it's through utilizing frameworks that says, what does good look like? And then the systems to provide that visibility that you can begin to shift that culture.
Well, I think this is a really important point, which is if you want to have continuous security compliance in a cloud first or a cloud forward organization, it requires the participation of all the people who are using cloud, right? Like, to your point, security has to be for everyone, but that requires a cultural shift in which security is now viewing that broader, set of individuals as participants. We have democratized access to IT. We have to democratize security. And that requires us to be able to start to trust but verify, to shift security left, to be more agile, to be more integrated. And then the next question is that you brought up, which is, well, what does good look like? Because if we have to communicate to someone what good looks like, that's got to be it, right? Like, you can't just say to someone, hey, do better security, right? That's a pretty that's setting people up for failure. You've got to tell them what security looks like and have that not be a bunch of goalposts that are constantly moving, right? Right. And so I think you and I've talked about before, there's a number of different frameworks that companies commonly use, especially in financial services, things like the CSA CCM, the Cloud Controls Matrix. I know a lot of folks also like NIST 853 or NIST Cybersecurity Framework, CSF, SOC 2, the CIS benchmarks for specific clouds. Usually we see our financial service customers using an amalgamation of these frameworks, right? It's not one or the other, and they're typically taking their approach to it, right? So they're saying this is the baseline, but let's be more nuanced than maybe the frameworks are. They work with the regulators or auditors as well to understand what those are. I was talking with some folks earlier today from a financial services organization. They were talking about TLS encryption, and they were saying, well, but it's not just TLS encryption; it's the version that matters, right? And so it's and that may not be the same for every organization. So there's a lot of nuance. You can go very deep into these frameworks, but the idea is if you don't establish the frameworks and educate again this broader audience of people in them, you will never get continuous security and compliance in cloud, because there's no way to do that without the participation of this broader group of people today.
I think just building upon that a little bit, back to your point though, there are a lot of overlaps between the frameworks, and I think, as you mentioned, not only is it not an afterthought, and I think we're really, as you mentioned earlier, to the point now where folks realize that it's not when you get to a certain point of scale, it needs to be the thought out of the gate about how you're securing this. And I think by looking at each of these and looking at some of their overlaps, you end up, to your point, coming up with the right framework for the organization. And you may even add in some custom checks for your organization that are specific to it. But having that as that gold standard that is communicated and then lived to is so important.
Yeah. Well, and let's go to systems, because so we have these layers that you have to build in order. You have to have a big cultural shift, which, by the way, should not be viewed as like a quick turnaround. I mean, you gotta sometimes it requires up-leveling people, requires massive change, organizationally. It may, it's a lot that you have to do culturally. And I know you and I have seen organizations that have come to, through our purview and said, we're going to go be cloud. We're going to do it tomorrow, and we're going to spend $100 million the next year. And a year passes, and they've spent $5 million in cloud because they just couldn't move the organization quickly enough from a cultural perspective to actually get to where they could do that and do so securely. And so I do think it's something where, like, these are big, meaty things that have to happen. And sometimes what happens is it runs in parallel, right? That security can't say, well, no, give us 2 years and we'll get there. Right. And so then I think you do need systems that help try and ensure that there is, both a way to go and implement some of the, or I think I say amplify and enable the shifts above, and also fill in the gaps, right? Because that's the thing, is like, there's always going to be gaps. There's going to be gaps in terms of your cultural and organizational dynamics. There's going to be gaps possibly in framework awareness, we'll talk about shortly. But so you need systems that really can give you, I think, all the layers that you want to do. So for me, it's about, do I have the ability to monitor and gain visibility, to assess risk, to prioritize risk, to remediate risk, to report all that so I can demonstrate that I've done that, and kind of automate that entire thing so I can survive the scale that comes with cloud, the scale of the number of people using it, the scale of the technology being, just the diversity of it, the scale of the number of services and the changes of those services and the ephemeral nature. There's an enormous, overwhelming complexity and scale issue that will not be overcome without automation. We'll talk about automation towards the end of this, but
Right.
Systems are critical to this process.
Absolutely, and back to you, because it's a point you made that I don't want to just gloss over. You think about that original slide and just the curve itself, right? It can't happen in series. It does have to happen in parallel. And I think the most successful organizations that we've seen have done a few things. One, they faced into the fact that processes as part of culture have to change with that democratization.
Yep.
Generally, there's a cloud services team that has cloud architects that understand how to secure things, along with a representative from that central information security organization that are out working with the individual teams at an accelerated parallel pace to ensure that as things are deployed, that they're being done so correctly. But to your point, without a system to have visibility, and in some cases take remediation on those things that do get through the wild, you're just not going to be able to do it at any kind of scale. Yeah,
agreed. Well, let's talk about that. One of the challenges we run into, and this, by the way, there's a lot of data that we've collected over the years through Rapid7 has a State of Enterprise Cloud Adoption Security Report. Our most recent one was the 2020 version. This comes from a survey of 2,000 IT professionals. We get a lot of insight from this. And one of the things we've seen is that the understanding of frameworks is incredibly low.
Yeah.
That when we surveyed IT professionals, only 42% did not know which frameworks their company uses to maintain compliance with standards and regulations. I mean, and that's IT professionals, by the way. So that includes developers and engineers, right? And so one of the things that I think is super important is you may think today that everybody knows what the standards are, but translating that into a DevOps team takes real effort. Again, it takes cultural change, organizational change. It requires the frameworks, and then it requires systems to automate your education, right? Because you have to have this constant communication cycle, I think, feedback loop that's allowing people to understand not only the frameworks that they have to comply with, but how those apply to the day in and day out of what they're doing and where they're in non-compliance, so they can take action. Because when I've talked to security, I was talking to a head of cloud security months ago, and he said, "Look, here's the thing. I have 10,000 developers in my organization.
Mm-hmm.
If I was going to go and tell them how to correct, even if I could, if I could reach the scale of going and correcting all the problems that they may manifest, I don't know how their applications work. Me going in and making a change to make something more secure may break an application that's critical to all of my customers, may break banking for hundreds of millions of people, right? That would be a terrifying thing. So I need to ensure that I'm communicating to them, again, what the framework looks like they need to comply with, where they're in violation, and how they need to resolve that, so they can do that with the contextual knowledge of their application, such that I'm not disrupting or slowing down. Instead, I'm accelerating and amplifying their efforts and driving innovation more rapidly. And that's what he was so excited about, was this is an opportunity for security professionals to really drive and accelerate innovation, because they actually remove friction from the process. So it's part and parcel of the cloud. You go to cloud for more agility, for more speed. Your security can actually even make that faster than traditional mechanisms. Have you seen that in practice, Thomas?
Yeah, and for one, whoever that individual is, I mean, to be quite frank, it's probably one of the most insightful ways that I've seen an individual think about it from the standpoint of the transformation and how information security needs to think about how they play in trying to accelerate. Because that old command and control mindset of every single architecture diagram needs to come through a process where it's reviewed and approved, and if any changes come through, then it needs to come back through this 6-week approval process. Again, it didn't scale then, and it really doesn't scale now. I think and it comes back to that system piece. Look, at the end of the day, I always believe that folks want to do the right thing, and even if there is some level of understanding around the frameworks themselves, in some cases, in many cases, what's not understood is how when you bundle some of the pieces together, you have inadvertently violated one of those standards.
Yes.
And that's where that system has to come into play, that it understands that when I stack this port with this network security group and these roles and permissions from an IAM perspective, I've now broken one of the framework standards. Wasn't intentional, but
Yep.
stacked together, it's become a problem.
Yeah.
And yes, we see it every day.
And let's talk about that, because I think one of the things where we see this friction, and we talked about it already, but developers and security still are often misaligned. So almost half of respondents who use public cloud said their developers, engineers either at times ignore or circumvent the cloud security and compliance policies that are in place.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, my experience is that no developer or engineer wants to build insecure product, right?
No.
Like I've never met anyone who's been like, that's my goal. I don't want to build secure product. That's bad. Instead, it's often that the way security is presenting the information is at the wrong time, at the wrong place, and in the wrong way. And as a result, there's it's like two ships passing the night. And so I don't think this is often intentional, but it just goes back to the fact that if you don't make the organizational and cultural and communication changes, if you don't shift cloud security left and embed it into the CI/CD process, you will never have continuous security, because you'll be a rock in the river. If you're simply at runtime, and once someone instantiates an application, you say, hey, you got 50 problems here, go fix them. Well, that's the wrong place, because developers don't operate in the production runtime. They operate in the CI/CD process much earlier.
Sure.
And so if you've not taken cloud security and brought it to where they operate, where they can engage and be participant, then you will fail. And we will continue to see the breaches, just the drumbeat of breaches because of that. And I don't know if you have anything, thoughts on that in particular.
Yeah, and I do. And what I'd say is, so this goes back to earlier days, right? This is a G experience where we didn't maybe completely understand that need around the cultural feedback loop as well as we should have. And I'd say, we'd implemented a product, the DivvyCloud was there. We've got, when somebody does something wrong, we just turned it off, right? Well, what did that individual do? Well, they thought they'd done something wrong in the deployment of the resource. So they just kept trying to deploy the resource over and over again, right? And what we didn't do, and what we ultimately did, and now is standard process, right, is to provide at either a runtime or change a feedback loop, whether it's through Slack or Teams or some way that's immediate that says, here's what's wrong, right? But still, folks don't like to necessarily be told they've done something wrong. Yeah. Back to your earlier point, the whole shift left in getting into the pipelines themselves and providing feedback prior to launch really helps in that cultural shift of saying, this goes against company policy. This is how it violates the framework.
Yep.
You either need to A, rethink your solution, or B, you need to make the required changes. And I think that has made an immense shift in the cultural adoption much more quickly.
Well, and because you're in the pipeline, that's when they can do the work, right?
Yeah,
once it's hit production runtime, it's too late. That's not that's not where, and they're not going to make modifications there. It needs to happen during the pipeline. So, one of the things we talk about quite a bit is this idea that, first of all, for folks who are thinking, how do I get to continuous security and compliance? Well, we talked about it all, right? We said culture, we talked about frameworks, and then we talked about systems. And one of the systems that everyone should be aware of is that there are cloud native security capabilities. The CSPs, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Alibaba, Oracle, all provide cloud security tools, native tools that you should absolutely be using, right? Yep. And they will provide huge advantages in their use. And those vary from things just like cloud identity access management, which Thomas already talked about, which is core to the entire security of everything in cloud. I mean, it is the new perimeter. But it can also be specific services like Amazon Macy, very focused on maybe data protection. But here's what we've seen, which is when we work with our customer base, just using native cloud services only gets you so far. And often, everyone has a different risk relative to risk profile, a risk appetite. And obviously for financial services, that tends to have to be very low for all the right reasons. And that for often cases, folks will start at A, where at A, they're just essentially, they've just got it started. And then they go to B, where they've applied the cloud native capabilities. And then they start to get some more complexity. They go from a single cloud to multi-cloud. They go from small footprint to a larger footprint. They go from a handful of people using cloud to a large number of people using cloud. They go from a smaller subset of services to a broader subset of services. They go to more ephemeral cloud native technology. So things that are now containers as a service, functions as a service, right? All these things drive cloud complexity. And as they do that, the challenge of cloud security is that you aren't able to have a single risk profile across all your clouds, because as you now have multiple approaches to cloud security based on the cloud native tooling. And so, I'd love to talk about, Thomas, is how can we help solve that and really gain that continuous nature? You can add something like a Divi Cloud. So we're a cloud security posture management product, essentially really help to secure really all phases of the cloud process. But maybe talk a little bit about your experience at GE and subsequently in how pairing Divi Cloud with that helps to drive that cloud security continuously.
Sure. As you mentioned, it doesn't necessarily have to be that multi-cloud. It really is complexity, whether it's, multi-service, multi-region, trying to stack in, full data sets in an organization that are running one way, coupled up to an organization that's maybe running on, Kubernetes and others. But as soon as you add that, the multi-cloud factor, it goes up even more exponentially. And I think each of the provider tool sets absolutely should be used. They provide a nice, a really great set of product to help manage some of these key risks. But by coupling that in, with a Divi Cloud that can normalize that data into a single data plane, and not only highlight the risk, but then provide that ability to integrate with other, very seamlessly into other corporate systems, whether it be ServiceNow, Tenable, and others, that can provide the insight into the rest of the organizational processes.
Yep.
Really provides that ability to address, and then stack automation on top of that to be able to address those things really almost real time. Now you've been able to really keep that risk profile quite low.
Yep. Well, I would say certainly Tenable, but also the Rapid7 products.
No, absolutely, of course.
No, it's true. Divi Cloud does work with lots of different products.
Yeah.
Obviously, we natively integrate with all of our Rapid7, including
Sure.
VM. But we do actually integrate with our competition as well, groups like Tenable, et cetera. Well, let's talk about that, because so one of the key elements that we really drive with the Divi Cloud product, I think this is key, is automation, right? So going back to what I said before, you need to have systems tooling that allows you to have visibility, to have assessment of risk, prioritization of risk, remediation of risk, which and then the reporting on that and the automation of that entire function, so that you have continuous security compliance all the time, right? It's not a one-time event. And I think it'd be useful to talk maybe through the 4 levels of automated remediation that we often think people talk about, because when people think about automation, it's automating that entire chain, but it's also automating remediation. And maybe can you give some examples of that, and then I think we'll pause there and thank everybody for joining. But let's end up on automation here.
Yeah, no, look, on the automation side, it's certainly, we've seen organizations literally just jump into the deep end of the pool, and I think that's a great approach. Others want to take a bit of a crawl, walk, run, but really it comes down to ensuring that you're looking at the assets through their entire life cycle. And Chris, you talked about it earlier around trying to get visibility in the pipeline, but assuming things are out there, whether it's they've made it through and a change comes in through your framework that all of a sudden it's no longer an acceptable asset, or something happens through drift, it needs to be addressed. And to try to do that manually is just not feasible in the cloud with the pace of change. And remediating things like whether it's a bucket has suddenly become open to public, or a security rule has been changed, or a group, an access list gets changed, where suddenly, again, put together with other items becomes a situation where it's no longer secure. You want to remediate it. One of the beauties that we've seen is, depending on the severity of the risk, is the ability to stack that automation to the Divi Cloud product. And that being, maybe initially, again, let's say it's a fairly low severity, I may want to give folks some time to fix it on their own, and if not, escalate it up. And if it hasn't been remediated in, say, 4 hours, we're just going to take that automated remediation to secure the organization.
Well, I think that's really key. I mean, first of all, it really is, just to summarize, right? If we want to drive continuous security and compliance, it's incredibly clear that financial services has to do this. They are targets of attack more frequently than any other industry. The number of attacks are going up. There are huge changes that need to be made in order to drive this forward. Again, cultural framework changes and driving them, and then certainly systems. And the key element of this really to survive scale is automation. So I do want to thank you, Thomas, for all your time and attention today. Hopefully we'll have the chance to answer some questions here in the system as well. And Tom, I'll hand it back to you.
Terrific. Chris, Thomas, thank you so much. We did give you guys your own show. You got a good routine going here.
Well, Thomas is a good looking one. I'm just here for the filler.
But we've had some excellent questions. I'm sure we'll get some more. So thanks again. And attendees, thank you for attending this session today. Please give us feedback on this and other sessions that you attend throughout the day. We're always interested in what you think about our speakers, our topics, and what you'd like to see next. For Information Security Media Group, I'm Tom Field. Thanks again for attending.